Welcome to our Bon Bon Facts podcast with Matt and Joanna. We provide valuable information that affects your everyday life, and for your entertainment only. In this podcast, you will find out why China's food supply is so toxic. What China crisis did the World Bank predict by 2030? Where do wealthy Chinese get their food supply from? And what has China done to provide more quality food to its population? We will talk about the Chinese acquisition of American bigger pork producer, and many others in the food industry. China is also hoarding grains. China has the most polluted cities globally. In 2019, China had 48 among the top 100 most polluted cities worldwide. And only 2% of the 400 Chinese cities had good air quality, according to Greenpeace. Since the implementation of its Air Pollution Prevention and Control Action Plan in 2013, China has achieved remarkable reductions of pollution in numerous major cities, notably Beijing. However, China is still facing the worst air pollution problem in the world. Outdoor air pollution has become a great concern for public health. Unfortunately, coal is still the major source of energy for China, constituting about 75% of all energy sources. China accounts for approximately half the world's coal consumption, and plans to continue expansion of new coal power plants.
Half of the world's coal consumption. No wonder, China has the most polluted cities in the world.
Yes, indeed. Air pollution in China predominantly consists of coal smoke, with suspended particulate matter, PM, and sulfur dioxide, SO2. Diesel emissions from transport also remain an important contributor.
This is a serious problem, because pollution produced by the factories also causes toxic soil and contaminated water.
You are correct. Let's find out more, why the soil in China is so toxic. Soil pollution has become a severe environmental issue in China over the past few decades, due to rapid industrialization and fewer regulations. China's chemical and fertilizer industries had been poorly regulated. A fifth of China's factories are located near the most productive agricultural areas, or near rivers used for irrigation. Many of the spilled chemicals end up in agriculture fields. Levels of toxic heavy metals in the wastewater are very high. Chinese government officials announced that 8 million acres of China's farmland had become so polluted that planting crops on it should not be allowed. The Chinese government reported that 19.4% of agricultural land was contaminated by chemical waste, pesticides, mining residues, and heavy metals. Moreover, it is severely polluted with cadmium, lead, and arsenic. Heavy metals contaminated more than 13 million tons of crops harvested each year.
13 million tons each year. That is a lot of contaminated crops. I imagine that some of them are exported to the United States, and will end up at our dining tables. That is a scary thought.
Joanna, if you think that is scary, wait until you hear the rest of what I have to say about pesticides. Pesticides affected 22 million acres of farmland. In 2012, a survey by the Institution of Nutrition and Food Safety reported that 65 pesticides were detected in food from 16 Chinese provinces. In 2019, a new study conducted by Greenpeace and the Institute of Ecology and Environment at China's Nanjing University stated that local governments had less motivation to ensure pollution was properly treated, because they can sell off the land quickly for urban development. Soil pollution is one of China's biggest environmental problems. The wide range of pollutants is a challenge in finding solutions. Furthermore, constant land ownership changes make it harder to hold polluters accountable. In 2019, China's first soil pollution control law came into effect, defining responsibilities for pollution, and establishing a special fund for the costs of remediation. However, To clean up the damage already done will cost about $1.3 trillion. Toxins in soil remain for centuries and are hugely expensive to clean up.
Wow, China's soil pollution is overwhelming. This is the reason why the food supply from China is tainted with heavy metals and pesticides. It is from toxic soil. Unfortunately, it is hard for consumers to eliminate food from China. For example, when I go to the supermarket, if I buy some tea or spices, how do I know that they are not from China? I tried to look for the origin, but it would not say on my tea package. And forget about the spices. By the way, tea is another topic of discussion that we need to include in our upcoming podcasts. Let's find out which prices in China that the World Bank predicted for 2030. In 2009, the World Bank reported that severe water scarcity crisis is emerging in China due to huge water demands, limited water supply, and deteriorating water quality. China will have exploited all available water supplies to the limit by 2030. 60% of China's 660 cities are short of water. In 2006, nearly half of China's major cities did not meet drinking water quality standards.
If they do not have good quality water, can you imagine what they would use for cooking and washing vegetables in food processing plants? It does not matter how strict the government guidelines are for food processing operations, if the water supply is tainted, it would be very difficult to avoid contaminated food. This will lead to our discussion in the next podcast about Chinese chicken exported to the United States. In 2017, The Economist reported that wastewater and industrial sewage are used in increasing amounts for irrigation, because there is not enough fresh water to go around. China produces over 60 billion metric tons of sewage a year, and in rural area only 10% of it is treated. Most of the sludge goes into lakes and rivers, and then onto agricultural fields. In 2014, a study found that 39 out of 55 areas using sewage irrigation were contaminated by cadmium, arsenic, and other poisons. The accumulation of heavy metals in intensively irrigated areas was rising. More than half of the rivers in China are too polluted to serve as a source of drinking water. Seafood producers are part of the problem. Enormous aquaculture farms concentrate fish waste, pesticides, and veterinary drugs in their ponds, and discharge the contaminated water into rivers and coastal areas, often without treatment.
If that what you said is true, why would the US government allow any crops from China to hit our supermarkets?
Joanna, the answer is the World Trade Organization. I would think that with all the extra cash in the reserve, the Chinese government would spend more money on treating toxic water. If what The Economist said is true about China using industrial sewage for agriculture irrigation, I am not surprised that Chinese crops are tainted with heavy metals. Many years ago, the newspapers reported that sewage water was used at a tofu plant in China. If people do not have potable water, it is natural that contaminated water would be used in processed food.
Matthew, China is a big country with 1.4 billion people and 200 million factories and farms. I'm sure that the Chinese government is aware of all the problems. However, rapid industrialization is the real cause. Pollutions created by the factories are overwhelming. As we mentioned, they polluted the air, soil, and water. The World Bank report came out 12 years ago. Since then, the Chinese government has taken some action to limit industrial wastes. But rules are not reinforced at the local levels. This discussion leads to the next topic: what the wealthy and elite people in China eat. Organic food for the rich is a new phenomenon in China. Trying to regulate roughly 200 million farms and food production companies is a challenging and almost impossible task for the Chinese government. Because of rising demands for organic food, a Chinese Thai billionaire started 2.5 acres of glass greenhouses to grow organic food for wealthy golf course members at his Rainwood Pine Valley Golf Course outside of Beijing. The soil is imported from Denmark. The use of pesticides and fertilizers is strictly banned. Furthermore, middle-class Chinese purchase organic and imported food online.
What have the Chinese government done to produce less toxic crops? Acquiring land overseas is one way for China to grow less contaminated crops. China is home to 20% of the world's population, but only 8% of the world's arable land. Therefore, it has gone abroad in search of farmland. The countries selling land are poorer nations in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe. In Africa alone, Chinese corporations grow cabbages in the Democratic Republic of Congo, raise fish in Angola, and harvest sesame seeds, cashews, and peanuts in Mozambique. China ranks as the most active country in the world in land trade, purchasing land from 33 countries, but selling it to only 3. Chinese-owned businesses also acquired food companies overseas, in the United States, Australia, and Europe. For example, in 2013, WH Group became the world's largest pork producer with the purchase of the American largest pork producer, Virginia-based Smithfield Foods for $4.7 billion. 30% more than the company's market value. Apart from the U.S. headquarters in Virginia, Smithfield has facilities in Mexico, Poland, Romania, Germany, and the United Kingdom. The Bank of China, a state-owned bank, approved the $4 billion loan to buy Smithfield in a single day. This was part of a $52 billion overseas spending spree by Chinese food companies since 2005, as China's population became wary of home-produced food. This WH Group factory in Zhengzhou, China, makes American-style pork products from imported Smithfield meat. Since 2019, workers have been shipping frozen pig carcasses to China for further processing. Smithfield Slaughterhouse in Virginia slaughters about 10,000 pigs a day. Since 2018, the African swine fever outbreak had killed millions of pigs, and pushed prices so high that Chinese importers are willing to pay hefty tariffs that China imposed on U.S. pork as part of the trade war. China's tariffs are 62% on frozen carcasses and 72% on muscle cuts. Smithfield represents 25% of the pork industry in the United States, and the takeover could signal a long-term threat to the vital American food industry.
Wow, 30% more than the market value. The Chinese must be desperate, or really like American pork. Matthew, I think this is the same Chinese pork producer that China's state-run media reported allegations of maggots, excessive bacteria, and illegal additives from its meat products since 2011. This acquisition may only make it more difficult to protect the American food supply.
Joanna, since Smithfield Foods is an American company, it is easier for the Chinese to use it to acquire many other companies in the United States. In 2016, WH Group used Smithfield Foods to acquire California-based Clarity Packing from Hormel Foods for $145 million. The acquisition included brands such as Farmer John and Sog's Specialty Meats. Smithfield also acquired hog farms in Arizona, California, and Wyoming as part of the deal.
China owns American pork industry, including Farmer John, my favorite brand for smoked sausage. In fact, China owns about 2,400 American companies in the United States. We can go on with this discussion forever, but we run out of time.
Joanna, since we are talking about pork, let me bring up an important issue. Growth hormone called ractopamine fed to pigs in the United States, and the fact that China banned ractopamine. China is not the only country that banned ractopamine. Due to safety concerns, about 160 nations, including all countries in the European Union, Russia, and China, have banned, or restricted the use of ractopamine drug during pig production. However, the U.S. pork industry had been feeding it to an estimated 60% to 80% of American pigs to rapidly boost growth rates. Ractopamine is a feed ingredient used to promote leanness in pork and beef. The use of ractopamine was controversial, with studies pointing to harmful health effects. In 2009, the European Food Safety Authority investigated ractopamine, and concluded that there was not enough data to show that it is safe for human consumption. Therefore, the European Union banned the drug. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, approved ractopamine for use on pigs, after just one human health study. The FDA required drug manufacturers to add this warning label. Ractopamine may increase the number of injured or fatigued pigs. Not for use in breeding swine. In 2020, Hormel Foods Corporation announced that it has joined other U.S. pork producers in eliminating ractopamine in its supply chain. Many companies including JBS USA and Tyson have followed Hormel to remove ractopamine to export to China, since drug is banned by the Chinese government. China continues to buy pork from the U.S., since the African swine fever decimated China's pork supply. Smithfield Foods started phasing out ractopamine in 2013, after being acquired by the Chinese.
It is nice to know. However, my question is, these companies eliminated ractopamine for exports, mainly to China. Are they still using it for the U.S. domestic market? I stopped eating pork 10 years ago. It was due to the taste or smell, more than anything else. I remember eating wild pigs from Italy. It was the best tasting pork I have ever eaten. I was told that Italy has so many wild pigs that they do not have to domesticate them. Also, why did the FDA approve ractopamine, when 160 other nations banned it? Whoever produced the drug must have spent a lot of money on lobbying it. This reminds me of arsenic drug fed to chicken and turkey for more than 2 decades. After a controversial study done by Johns Hopkins University stating that scientists found a high level of arsenic residue in people who consumed chicken. Consequently, drugs companies voluntarily withdrew it from the U.S. market. In 2016, the FDA admitted that the drug is harmful to humans if they consumed arsenic-fed chicken. This is quite disturbing. Drug companies will continue developing other drugs for these animals. Who knows what is next?
From my understanding, in addition to pigs, the FDA now also allows the drug to be used in turkeys and cows raised for food. Perhaps the simplest way to avoid ractopamine or arsenic, or any other growth promoter is to buy animal welfare approved certified meat. Or buy organic meat, but this can be expensive. Let me ask you a question: who owns Australia's biggest dairy operation?
Let me guess. China.
In 2016, not long after China's leader, Xi Jinping, visited the remote island state of Tasmania, Liu Shanfeng, chairman of Ningbo Shanfeng, purchased Tasmanian Van Diemen's Land Company, VDL, Australia's biggest dairy operation for more than $200 million. Mr. Liu paid for the purchase with 3 loans, 1 from a lender in Australia, and 2 from China's biggest state-run banks, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, and the China Zhejiang Bank. Joanna, I recently found an interesting article about China hoarding food. In December 2021, Nikkei Asia published a detailed article on China hoarding grains. For those of you who are not familiar with the name, Nikkei Asia is a major Japan-based English-language weekly news magazine, focusing on the Asian continent and international developments. Nikkei also owns the London-based Financial Times. It publishes a lot of interesting and well-researched articles on Asia. I like this magazine a lot. This is what it said. China has less than 20% of the world's population, but has managed to stockpile more than half of the globe's corn and other grains, leading to steep price increases across the planet and dropping more countries into famine. China's grain stocks at the end of the 2021-2022 season were estimated by the International Grains Council to be 323.4 million tons. This is more than half the global total of 607.4 million. The U.S. Department of Agriculture stated that China is expected to have 69% of the globe's corn reserves in the first half of 2022. Its rice reserve is 60% of the world's reserve, and its wheat is equal 51% of global reserve. COFCO Group, a major Chinese state-owned food processor, runs one of China's largest food stockpiling bases, in the northeastern part of China. It stores beans and grains gathered from home and abroad. These grains are shipped via rail and sea to different parts of China.
COFCO stands for China Oil and Foodstuffs Corporation. It is a Chinese state-owned food processing holding company. COFCO Group is China's largest food processor, manufacturer, and trader. It is also one of Asia's leading agribusiness groups. This company is in charge of stocking grains for China.
In fact, China is maintaining its food stockpiles at a historically high level. According to Chinese officials, its wheat stockpiles can meet demand for 1.5 years. Over the past 5 years, China has increased its imports of soybean, corn, and wheat significantly. China has purchased from the United States, Brazil, and other supplier nations. China also imports more beef, pork, dairy, and fruits. The projection shows that China will continue to hoard grains.
During the period of December 2021, news sources reported that Chinese buyers have been making large purchases of French wheat and barley, along with Ukrainian corn and barley. Chinese importers had secured at least several 100,000 tons of grain from France and Ukraine. This happened a couple of months before Russia invaded Ukraine. One reason for rising food prices is China is hoarding. By China's own estimation, these reserves are at a historically high level and are contributing to higher global food prices. This is another article from Reuters, is one of the largest news agencies in the world. It stated that rising food prices have recently increased hunger fears for developing countries, and United States officials pointed out that China could use its stockpiles to provide more grain to the poor people around the world.
In July 2022, the United States said that it will hold Russia accountable for the agreement with United Nations to allow ships to go through the Black Sea for grain exports from Ukraine, and called out China for stockpiling grains that could be used for global humanitarian needs. Russia and Ukraine are major global wheat suppliers. Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, has caused food prices to increase. The World Food Programme said that it has pushed some 47 million people into acute hunger. Some 40% of the first grain shipments out of Ukraine in April 2022 went to China. However, China stated that it plans to contribute 30,000 tons of emergency humanitarian food aid to developing countries. This is the end of our podcast. The contents of this podcast are from the book China, Good, Bad, and Ugly, written and published by Aubon Bon LLC. In the next podcast, we will talk about why we should avoid food from China, and the negative impact China has on the California population.
Please visit our website at abonbon.com for more resources and publication.
You may also buy us coffee by clicking on the support show link. Thank you and have a great day.